Now, a very good afternoon to all and welcome to Yayasan Mendaki's Education Symposium 2020. Now, this year's symposium theme is Nurturing from Young Foundations for Lifelong Learning in Post-COVID World and will feature 5 webinars by researchers from NIE's Center for Research in Child Development, CRCD. It gives me great pleasure to be your MC this afternoon. Now, today's session, How Do We Teach Our Children to be Bilingual at Home and in School, is the first installment of our webinar series. Joining us, we have our guest of honor, Mr. Zaki Mohammed, Deputy Chairman of Yayasan MENDAKI. Now, together with Mr. Zaki, we are pleased to have with us Dr. Beth O'Brien, Head of Early and Middle Childhood Research at NIE's Center for Research in Child Development, Dr. Vaniti Vaish, Associate Professor at NIE's English Language and Literature Academic Group, Ms. Sanesa Salleh, Malay Language Specialist from Professional and Education Division of PAP Community Foundation, PCF, and Mr. Faisal Aman, Senior Manager at Yayasan MENDAKI's Research and Planning Department, who is the moderator for our panel discussion today. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Now, today's session will be broken down into 2 segments. The first 20 minutes will be a presentation by Dr. Beth and Dr. Vaish on today's topic, how do we teach our children to be bilingual at home and in school? And the next 40 minutes will be a panel discussion. Now, without further ado, we are happy to kick off today's session with a presentation by Dr. Beth O'Brien and Dr. Vaniti Vaish. In the presentation, our esteemed presenters will discuss how the home and classroom environments help build strong foundations in preschool children to write effectively and speak fluently in their mother tongue in English. May I now invite Dr. O'Brien and Dr. Vaish, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm just waiting for the slides to come up here. Okay, so firstly, we should consider the purpose for which, or the reason why, bilingualism is a central goal of the education system in Singapore. So at the heart of this goal, it's not simply about the linguistic component of learning, using, and becoming proficient in multiple languages, but there's also an important cultural component as well. In the mother tongue language curriculum, the transmission of cultural knowledge is highlighted, and so learning the mother tongue language contributes to the development of students' cultural identity as well. Considering how to encourage children's bilingual development, linguists suggest that first there should be a need to use the additional or target language, which in many cases will be the less proficient mother tongue language. And secondly, they suggest that family and community are needed to support adequate input and use of the target language. So while current trends in Singapore show declines in mother tongue language use in homes, this also suggests that schools and preschools, along with the community, play an important role in supporting children's bilingual development. So what can be done to help maintain bicultural bilingualism? Well, from research abroad, a review of studies on dual language development in the early childhood years summarizes a few key factors that contribute. And these include the relative amount of exposure to each language, which is found to be related to children's vocabulary size and grammatical ability in each language. Also, preschoolers' language usage is a key factor, and also parental literacy practices in the target or second language, which is related to children's language outcomes as well as their literacy interests. In another book on this subject, the preschool period is highlighted as critical for children's development in multiple domains, which includes language. The author of this book reminds us adults that from the child's perspective, going to school perhaps for the first time and learning what might be a new language for many children requires a secure atmosphere where they can learn without anxiety. And other studies of children's achievement show that there's a unique and complementary role that's played by educators, parents, as well as communities. This macrostructure suggests that for children to learn and do well in school, parent involvement is one key component, along with partnerships between the home, the school, and the community. And research shows that children's achievement is better predicted by parent involvement than their income or social status, where more involved parents would be parents who create a conducive home learning environment and also have high but reasonable expectations for their child, and they also show proactive engagement with the school. In this talk, we're going to concentrate on school and family components, but we still acknowledge the importance of community and the important work that our symposium hosts at MENDAKI are conducting on this front. So what does the research in Singapore tell us? Well, from one large-scale project that's referred to as the Singapore Kindergarten Impact Project, or SKIP, we followed children across the kindergarten years into primary school to track their development in many different domains, which includes their bilingual development. First, looking at the school environment in this project, we observed classroom lessons across a range of anchor operators focusing on mother tongue lessons, and we examined how teachers contributed to language input or exposure, as well as language output or use by the children. In particular, we observed things like the quality of language input from the teacher, how many different words or different types of sentence structure he or she would use when speaking the language, also how language forms were taught for emergent literacy. Using the mother tongue to teach concepts was another thing we examined. And we also observed how teachers encouraged children's mother tongue language usage by creating a positive, secure climate for them to speak, and also by supporting their speech with scaffolding and modeling. And we looked at some other strategies as well, but I'll concentrate on these two here. What we found was that teachers varied in how they used the language and how they encouraged children's participation in language lessons, where teachers showed moderate sophistication in these aspects. Oops, sorry. On the other hand, some areas were less emphasized across many classrooms, including concept development and teaching of language forms. Highlighted here is one teacher who showed exceptional sophistication in the different input and output strategies for teaching. For example, with her teaching of language forms, which I'll give a few examples of next. So this teacher used different activities to highlight things like spelling, alphabet knowledge, and vocabulary during circle time, during book reading, and during literacy instructions. For example, during circle time, this teacher used songs as well as clapping to emphasize syllable structure within the language. And she also drew attention to differences in English terms in terms of pronunciation of cognates. She also engaged in a lot of interaction discussions during book reading and emphasized words in English and how they're expressed in Malay. And then during literacy lessons, she would do things like connect letter names to their sounds by drawing children's phoneme awareness and having them come up with words that begin with the same sounds, while at the same time providing some cues and scaffolding during this activity. So these activities compared with other classrooms where teachers would perhaps only model word pronunciation, or where teachers would teach words and letters by only focusing on repetition and memorization as strategies. As the second part of the SKIP project, we also focused on the home environment, and this involved information that we gathered from parent reports. So this included information about literacy-related activities that the parents would do at home, such as shared book reading. It would also involve parent activities like teaching their children more directly about letters or characters and the sounds that they are related to. It also involved parents' own reading habits and children's motivation for looking at books and inquiring about print. Parents rated how often each of these activities or events occurred, from rarely at the bottom here to frequently at the top of this graph. And across the different components shown across the x-axis here, across the different components of the home literacy environment, we saw that parents reported more frequent use of English in these activities than the mother tongue language on average. And this was for all children in the study. When we looked at families of Malay and English speakers, these frequency ratings were a bit closer for the different components of home literacy environment. But the frequency of shared reading and the number of books in the home still showed a gap with more frequent English than Malay reading and books. Importantly, these activities of shared book reading are related to children's vocabulary learning over time, as has been found in international studies. Here, we found that while there was more spoken English in the home had a negative impact on children's Malay vocabulary over time, we also found that shared reading in Malay had a positive impact on children's vocabulary outcomes for Malay. And this was a similar pattern that we found for the other mother tongue languages as well. Lastly, children's literacy skills have cross-language influence, as shown here in some of our statistical models for Malay and English. These models might look a little bit complicated, but really they're here just to show that each of the arrows shows that there's a relationship between English reading and, in this case, Malay reading. And the curved arrows show that this relationship is at one point in time. So at kindergarten 1, kindergarten 2, and primary 1, English and Malay reading skills were related. These straight arrows also show that this relationship continues over time. And so what this tells us is that the skills that children learn for reading in Malay might contribute to their English reading and vice versa. And the same pattern we can see for spelling skills as well. We also saw some similarities, but smaller effects for cross-language influence in our Chinese English and Tamil English children. So next I'm going to hand over to Dr. Vaish, who will take you through some case studies of selected children from the SKIP project and give you a deeper view of their language use in their homes and schools.
Okay, thank you, Beth. I'll take over from where Dr. O'Brien has left off. And I'd like to, sorry. Okay. Right. So the research problem that we were addressing in the homeschool transition study, which is a part of the SKIP project that Dr. Beth just described to you, is international research which shows that children who grow up especially from the USA, that children who grow up in a disadvantaged home do not have adequate access to a linguistically rich environment, and therefore they develop less language. And also is a related problem of how much language children bring to the school door. That means when a child comes to P1, how much mother tongue and how much English does he or she know? And finally, there is a dearth of description of pedagogy of language teaching in preschool. So that's what inspired us to do this research. We had 17 participants, 6 to 7-year-olds, 6 Chinese, 6 Indian, and 6 Malay. One of our Malay participants dropped out, so we ended up with 5 Malay preschoolers. This was a longitudinal study. We collected data from 3 home observations across the year of 1 hour each and 3 school observations. So in total, we had about 100 hours of video data. In terms of methodology, data collection was between June 2016 and June 2017. Our goal was to collect naturally occurring speech. So there was no intervention on our part. We recorded the children in their regular routines at home and at school. Once we had collected the data, we coded or analyzed the data, 50% of the data for quantity and quality of talk. In quantity, we looked at the amount of language that the children produced in English and mother tongue. And in quality, we coded for 3 main variables: mean length of utterance, lexical density, and discourse complexity. And I'll say a little more about these variables in the next slide. So mean length of utterance, you can see in the yellow bar on the left, is a measure of how long is the utterance that a child produces and how many morphemes does he or she use when he produces a sentence or an utterance. Lexical density is about richness of vocabulary. So how many different words does the child produce in mother tongue and English? And finally, discourse complexity is about grammar at the level of syntax. So how much grammar, for instance, relativizations, use of subordinate clauses, does the child produce in English only and mother tongue only utterances. So on the right of this slide, you can see a summary of our findings. We found that most of the 17 children were mother tongue dominant. And in keeping with this dominance, they produced many more English only utterances as compared to mother tongue only utterances. However, though they were English dominant, they did not know more morphology or grammar in English than they did in their mother tongue. So that was a bit surprising. We also coded for trans-languaged utterances, and these are utterances where the children mix languages. So if the child uses Malay and English in one utterance, that is considered a trans-languaged utterance. Though there were fewer of these had the highest MLU and discourse complexity, and I'll come back to this point in my conclusion. And finally, there were no discernible trends across the 3 home and school observations. So though this was a longitudinal study, we did not see any growth across the 3 home observations. This slide is about the speech of caregivers and teachers. So we found that the caregivers, now in most cases, the caregiver was the mother, and the mothers were also English dominant. In the few cases where the mother actually distributed languages evenly between English and mother tongue, the children showed better language outcomes. In terms of teacher talk, we coded for one variable, and that's explanatory talk. And this is a type of teacher talk which is highly correlated with language learning. It's identified by the presence of principles and explanations. Unfortunately, in our data set, we found 0 episodes of explanatory talk in the mother tongue classes, Tamil, Chinese, and Malay, and only 4 episodes in the entire 50 hours of explanatory talk in the English classes, and those examples were actually relatively weak. So there was a low level of explanatory talk in the language classes. I will now go on to specific details of our 5 Malay participants. In this slide, you can see the total number of utterances that we collected from our 5 preschoolers across the 3 home observations. This slide distributes the utterances between English only, Malay only, and trans-languaged utterances. Now, there's a lot of information here, but what you need to focus on is that the bars on the top left are the highest. And what that means is that the children mainly produced English only utterances. And you can see on the top right that there are very low bars for Malay only utterances. And surprisingly, even the number of trans-languaged utterances, except for a few students, were relatively low in occurrence. This slide is about mean length of utterance. That's the length of the utterance and morphology. So here you can again see that the bars on the top left, which are for English only, are the highest, which shows that when the children spoke only English, their utterances were longer, and they displayed more knowledge of morphology as compared with Malay only utterances. Now, an important finding here is at the bottom figure, in the bottom figure, and you can see that when they produced trans-language utterances, that means when they mixed Malay and English, they actually produced the longest utterances. And you can see here we have 8.38 for RAY. That's his pseudonym, that's not his real name. What that means is that when children mix languages, they are more expressive, they produce longer utterances, they use more morphology, and they are able to take risk. They take the risk of experimenting with new linguistic patterns. This slide is about vocabulary. Again, you can see that on an average, the children produced many more different nouns, pronouns, articles, verbs, etc. in English than they did in mother tongue. There is an exception here, of course, HA, you can see this student has different outcomes, and HA is effectively bilingual. He's one of the few bilinguals in our data set, and he has a rich vocabulary in English and an even richer vocabulary in Malay, as you can see from the final bar. In terms of discourse complexity, that is the amount of grammar that the children displayed in their utterances, we found that they mainly produced simple sentences in Malay, and their utterances had very few examples of relativization. And we see the same in English. I don't have time to show you that slide, but the results are the same for English. This slide is about caregiver speech. So, and I'd like to make a link between this and the slide about vocabulary in children. And because of lack of time, I'll just point to HA's outcomes here. This is the outcome for HA's mother, actually. We don't have the names of the mother, so this is HA's mother. And you can see clearly that the caregiver herself is very proficient in both the languages. And clearly, this has a very positive outcome on the language that HA produces. So in both the case of the caregiver and the preschooler, they are effectively bilingual. They have a rich vocabulary, and the child is actually Malay dominant and shows a rich morphological variety in his utterances. Finally, our conclusion is that the main implication of these data is that we should encourage parents to distribute the languages across bilingualism, so that the children are exposed to as much Malay, Tamil, and Chinese as they are in English. And in those situations where the caregiver is also English dominant, because the young parents do often tend to be English dominant, we can take the help of technology or media to create a very linguistically rich environment at home, so that in terms of input, there is at least an attempt to have a 50-50 distribution across languages at home, because as I displayed, this has a very positive outcome on the speech of the child. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. O'Brien and Dr. Vaish, for your insightful sharing. We will now move on to the panel discussion. Together with Dr. O'Brien and Dr. Vaish, we have Mr. Zaki Mohammed and Ms. Sanesa Salleh. And Mr. Faisal, can you please join us for the panel discussion? May I please invite the three of you to turn on your webcams and microphones for the discussion. Now, before I pass the session on to Mr. Faisal, may I remind you that if you have any questions during the segment, you may post it on Zoom's Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Faisal, over to you, please.
Thank you, Afia, for your kind introduction. A warm welcome, everyone. My name is Faisal from the Research and Planning Department of Yayasan MENDAKI. We are now streaming live from Zoom and Facebook to cater to the overwhelming response. So MENDAKI Education Symposium 2020 has indeed gone international this year, with viewers as far as Portugal and Australia. So a warm welcome, everyone. So to open up the panel session today, may I invite Mr. Zaki Mohammed, our Deputy Chairman of Yayasan MENDAKI, to share his thoughts. Mr. Zaki, please.
So firstly, thank you very much to everyone for joining us, despite how we are coping with COVID. And really, today's theme about the nurturing from young foundations for lifelong learning in the post-COVID world is really a pertinent theme today, especially with how, as our speakers had shown, the development of our children in a bilingual setting or trilingual setting in some countries become an important part of the education, and how we can use, or we should use, the opportunity as they are young in preschool to adopt lifelong learning practices, and how they can embody some of these practices through learning with their parents and the family, with family support as well. So I want to thank Dr. O'Brien as well as Dr. Vaish for spending time today to share their insights on the studies that we have in Singapore. In fact, for Singapore, our our initiative or endeavors in bilingual education also stems from the fact that we are a very multilingual, multiracial society, and we live in a region where you find a lot of diversity, huge diversity in terms of language use. And initially, I think when we talk about bilingualism, it was really about understanding your mother tongue, building identity as a race and culture. But I think increasingly, you find as well that in the region here, you have greater, language use across different cultures in Malay, Tamil, or Mandarin. The ability for one to also connect with the rest of the region and appreciate different cultures and understanding also comes into play. And I think children do recognize that, especially those who are a bit more exposed to to different languages and cultures. And I fully agree with the findings that we need to expose them more. Although today, if you look at the content, I noticed some of the studies earlier on that talked about even computer games and what they use, for reference. You would find that many of these are typically in the English medium too. So that's an increasing challenge as you go on the internet, and naturally, the language we typically use on applications or articles will tend to be in English. And I think in Singapore, you can also see the trend where more parents are typically also more conversant in English because that's our language medium. So, without further ado, I would like to open the floor for the panel. And I want to thank all our viewers, including those from overseas, as well as our partners like NIE for supporting us, NIE and TCF for supporting us today on our panel, as well as the insights that we can gain from this symposium.
Right, thank you, Mr. Zaki, for those insightful comments and also strong support. And to a large extent, I agree with Mr. Zaki that bilingualism makes us unique as a nation and provides us with identity and belonging. As was mentioned earlier, research also shows that bilingual helps children to focus better and stimulate their mental development. Now let's dive into the topic on how to teach our children to be bilingual at home as well as in school. So researchers, preschool teachers and parents hope that our preschool children can be fluent in both English and their mother tongue. Most of us believe that we can start from young as well. However, is this the truth? So may I now pose this question to Ms. Sanesa. Ms. Sanesa is our Malay Language Specialist from the Profession and Education Division at PCF. So Ms. Sanesa, what are your observations? What is the current situation in schools? Are the children actually effectively bilingual?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The question on the current situation and of how language proficiency in English and mother tongue is really a very interesting topic. Just now when I was listening to from Dr. O'Brien and Dr. Vaish, it really triggers the part on, it's so real that the children are also, the dominant, the English language is really dominant in their daily lives. So, well, in many typical preschool setting, the situation is that the number of teachers teaching in English language are, in fact, many more compared to those who are teaching the Malay or other mother tongue language. So, of course, in terms of quality of teaching, we know that these teachers must be equipped with the right skills and language proficiency in the language that they are teaching. For example, if they are teaching English language, then they must be proficient in English. And if you are teaching mother tongue, perhaps the Malay or Tamil or Chinese, then you have to be proficient in that language. However, the real situation that we have also heard that many teachers prefer to teach the young children in English because they themselves claim that they are not yet strong or proficient in their own mother tongue language. And as a result, we are also facing situation where, we run out of local teachers to teach our own mother tongue, like the Malay, the Chinese, or the Tamil. And then at the same time, we also know that these teachers, there are also teachers who are good in both languages and are also able to perform that dual role. But we know that teaching English and their own mother tongue may also, may sound a bit challenging or not easy for these teachers, but the situation warrants for them to take up such role. And I guess along the way, they become efficient. to switch role when they are teaching the children for the benefit of the children. So yeah, the situation is like that now, I guess.
Thank you, Ms. Sanesa. Maybe just a quick follow-up question on what else is PCF going to support in terms of our practitioners and the parents. So are there any professional development courses, or what can they do?
Okay, PCF is committed to provide quality preschool education program to the children in our centers, and our curriculum always remains to be current and contemporary as we continue to revise and renew the content of our curriculum as we move along with time. Okay, what our curriculum provides are probably opportunity for the children to acquire language through, acquire language experiences, perhaps through various activities like, vocabulary building, through storytelling, through singing, exploration of concepts, like discovering of the world. And of course, we have the phonics and reading program for the children to further enrich the learning of language. And for PCF, our teachers will have to undergo the regime of curriculum training and workshop conducted by our curriculum experts in HQ. And on top of that, this is on top of their own professional training for DPT, which they have to also attend. Okay, and along the way, the teachers are also trained in various skills, one of which is probably, the differentiated learning in teaching and learning, so that these teachers can also meet the diverse learning needs of the children as they learn to speak, to read, and to write. That means the ability of speaking, reading, and writing differs from one age group to another, and also from one child to another. So in our classroom, the teachers will also extend learning through probably learning centers and for the children to further explore their language, the learning of language. In this kind of language center, there would be probably books for children to read, audio for them to listen, and then paper and pencil for them to write. So we continue to provide for our teachers, and I guess in PCF, the support is always very, very rich, not only for the teachers, the children, as well as the parents, in fact. Mm-hmm.
All right, great. Maybe we could have comments from Dr. Vaish and Dr. O'Brien on the proficiency of teachers, second language teachers as well. What observations did you see? Dr. O'Brien?
Sure. In terms of, well, I think in our classroom observational rating scheme, we looked at various things in addition to teacher proficiency, which was a component of quality of the input. So there was perhaps a range of proficiency in terms of maybe use of grammar or pronunciation, but I think this also varied across where were the teachers coming from. So some teachers, for example, Mandarin teachers may have come from Taiwan, so they had slightly different variations in how they pronounced or used certain grammatical structures. And there were also a couple of things that we looked at with regard to both Tamil and Malay, with how teachers would navigate the diglossic registers of these two languages. So teaching children literary forms in Tamil, we accounted for as the teacher using the literary form in the right context. Whereas when the teacher was engaging children in conversation, they might be using standard spoken Tamil instead of literary Tamil. So we try to account for these, how the teachers contextualize their language use within the classroom in those two cases.
Okay, I think there are a few questions on the Mentimeter, and I would just want to jump into that at the moment. So we have been talking about preschool teachers and how they were supporting in terms of language acquisition. We also have a lot of questions with regards from parents. So one question is by Ms. Nadia Ghani. She asks, as parents, what are some suggestions on how we attempt to achieve a 50-50 balance or distribution on languages, both at home and in school? So maybe I could direct this question to Ms. Sanesa.
Yeah. Okay. What can schools do, or how can parents also participate in the promotion of mother tongue, specifically Malay language? I guess so. What I feel is that one of the ways which school can do to help parents promote the use of mother tongue is also to engage and involve parents actively. And in a typical preschool setting, the daily mother tongue language lesson takes place for like about an hour for the K1 and K2 children daily, and for the younger ones maybe lesser. So centers can only give that much of time with the for the children during that. So of course, for center, for where I come from, we often provide take-home activity or the take-home kit for parents to extend the children's learning at home. And like for example, giveaways, we have got song lyrics or rhyme for the parents to use with the children, to recite with the children or sing with the children. Sometimes the center also provide like simple recipe written in Malay for parents to prepare the food with the children, or even like we also provide like recommended lists of books for parents to borrow from the library, or in fact read with the children. And we also went beyond, like we also provide links for parents to also explore learnings through technologies. So I guess we are also working very closely with parents to promote the use of Malay or mother tongue in the best way we can. And we know that many of our mother tongue language teachers are very dedicated in what they do. They for them, the mother tongue is very dear to them. The reason why they choose to become a mother tongue language teacher. But again, like I mentioned, they have that little amount of time to be with the children to promote the use of mother tongue. And of course, we still need parents to to be our partners. And then as often as you can, I would like to also encourage parents to be comfortable and confident and use the mother tongue language as much as possible, so that when the children are watching you using it, of course they would also be motivated to use and would want to communicate with you. So yeah, for schools, we really welcome parents' involvement to promote the use of mother tongue.
So I think there are areas of synergy that between parents and teachers. I think this is an area that we want to look at the next few years as well. We have one question by Michelle Lee. If I may, I will read her question. Will being bilingual reduce the child's English language competency? Will it result in, instead of being competent in one language and not in both? That means if you do English, too much English, then what happens to the Mandarin? And similarly for the Malay language as well. So let me repeat again, will being bilingual reduce the child's English language? So maybe perhaps you can look at the research by Dr. O'Brien as well as Dr. Vaish. Your comments please on this.
Okay, so thank you for that question. That's a very good question. I know parents are concerned about, especially a drop in competence in English, and that will affect the school achievement of the child. Let me assure you that languages are not filled inside the brain in terms of level. It doesn't mean that if you know more English, you will learn less Malay, vice versa. It doesn't work that way. So for instance, in certain countries like Belgium and Switzerland, children learn 3 languages. Even in some South Asian countries like India, children learn 3 languages, and they can be equally fluent and proficient, though it depends on the domains on which you're testing the child. One language can be better as a school language, another language can be better as a spoken language, and so on. So I can assure you that it in no way will disenfranchise the children to teach them another language. They can be perfectly fluent, competent readers and writers in 2, sometimes even 3 languages. It's not a problem.
Okay, Ms. Sanesa, do you have any comments on this choice by parents?
Yeah, well, true. I guess the parents' concern is real because they may think that if the child is like speaking too many, for example, Malay language, then would the the ability to speak English be lessened? But we know that children pick up language at a very young age, and they can pick up like as many language, as they grow up. But we also know that by the time they reach 6 years old, then the use of that language is also minimized. That's why at this preschool age, we are always encouraging children to be picking up more than one language, at least 2, if more, better. But yeah, I agree with Dr. Vaish that certainly the skill to that if you are bilingual, you would not be able to speak English as well as how you speak in Malay or Tamil or your own mother tongue, because the children are able to adapt on their own, and especially when they are also with certain friends. We know that when they are with this group of friends, they would know how to speak in that language that the friends understand. And then when they are with another group of friends, then they use that language which they know, they are able to communicate with that group of friends. So children are very, how would I say,
Adaptable?
yes.
Yeah. I think you are right in terms of them being young and being adaptable to a lot of different circumstances. They can code switch as well. I think that's something that we often forget. We have one question from a parent. He asked, this is by Syed Ali Samaid. He says, which is better in teaching preschool kids in mother tongue, using bilingual books versus single language mother tongue book? I think that's a very good question, because our parents are actually very concerned. They want to know the strategies and tips. So perhaps we can get tips from Ms. Sanesa as well as Dr. O'Brien, whether we should use just single language books or both bilingual books.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I think there's some research that's been started here in Singapore by Dr. Muklis at NIE on the use of dual language books, and he actually observed interactions between parents and their children while they were doing shared activity with these books. So I think there's some positives and maybe some negatives of the dual language book. I think positives would be that children themselves that he observed in his study actually kind of made their own observations about differences between the 2 languages. So they noticed things like there's different grammatical structure in English versus in Malay, for example. So there's some interesting opportunities for having the children be able to contrast the languages directly when they're reading these types of books. I'm not aware of any research that looks specifically at that question of which one is better. It's actually a project that we're kind of interested in conducting at some point, but I think that's all we know presently about it here.
I see. Okay, how about Ms. Sanesa, in terms of your experience?
Okay.
Any recommendations?
Yeah, there are many books which is bilingual in English as well, and in Malay, which is produced by publishers and all. And we have got many of that kind of books in our own centers as well. Somehow the children are also able to identify that these are the sentences in English, these are the sentences in Malay, and those who are able to read, they are also able to read accordingly to the language. What we also have is what we call the wordless book, which the children are also able to use it in English as well as in Malay. So the question about should we promote bilingualism book or book with 2 languages or not, I think I don't see the harm of providing such materials to the children, because we are exposing them to more language learning. And then I guess along the way, they would also be able to look around them. The environment is also rich with the English language labels and words around, and sometimes they also have it in Malay or even Tamil or Chinese. So these children they are naturally able to adapt, like you said. So there is really no worry about these young children not being able to or which one should come first and all. So bilingualism actually should be happening, with the children.
I think another follow-up question by some parents, based on the questions listed, we look at social media, and especially in post-COVID world or in the post-COVID world, we see a lot of e-books and digital media. How is it going to affect the way students are taught? Yeah.
Well, in PCF, now that you are talking about technologies, I guess our teachers are also exploring the use of technologies in our centers. And in the beginning, it was only for probably the English language learning, but the Malay teachers are also excited to use those materials for their own lesson. That's where B-board, they're using the B-board. They are also taking part in introducing the STEMI approach to the children. And even like now we are also in a situation where social distancing and limitations of the teachers moving from one class to another. So as a result, they are also using technologies, like they are videotaping their own lesson and presenting it to the children, and even they create their own, they're using iPad as a tool for teaching. So technology is also one way for the teachers to explore. And you're right, the children are also using those technologies to be learning language. And it's interesting how they are actually more fluent about technologies.
How about in terms of research, Dr. Vaish and Dr. O'Brien, in terms of the usage of social media as a platform to increase our level of competency or increase our language acquisition? Because sometimes when we go out, shopping, or when we go out eating at restaurants, we see parents just giving the iPad to the child, and then they will just carry on with their daily business. So is this a way of doing? Is there a way of doing things when we talk about social media? Is there a pedagogy in it?
Well, definitely, I think technology is a very powerful resource in language learning. I think the current concern is about quality and standards. As you know, the web has just so much information. Some of it is appropriate, some of it is actually not high quality language. So I think, but if we can find materials, ebooks, which are constructed strategically. For instance, an ebook is not just a book that is a digital book. The language has to be strategically controlled, so that the goals of like vocabulary learning are met. And there can be various aspects to it. Like if you click on a word, that word will give you the English translation or the Tamil translation and so on. So those kinds of technologies have to be built into the book. And I guess we need some innovative vendors to create those platforms. But yes, if we have that, then yes, translating, translanguaging, and having multiple languages embedded within one ebook can be a very powerful resource in language learning.
Dr. O'Brien, your thoughts on this, using social media as a form of learning?
Yeah, I think I would agree with what has been said already. One thing I would note is that we would also have to consider developmental phases. So certainly with research in children like under 3 years of age, so very early childhood, and at the period of time when we're talking about first language acquisition, there's research that shows that if a child's just watching a video of somebody talking in the language, they don't pick up as much, they don't learn as much of that language as they do if they're actually interacting with someone in person. So there is something about person-to-person dialogue and maybe facial cues, people believe this might be part of it, that helps to lay the groundwork for early language acquisition and early in life. Whereas when we get to children who are preschool age, you know, I think, again, as the previous panelist said, there are more opportunities for children to interact with technologies in a productive way where they can actually learn, provided that the content is high quality and, you know, in a developmentally appropriate platform for them.
Yeah. Okay, I think we need to take this opportunity to look at the Mentimeter and see what our audience members think. Maybe we can share the screen. So from the screen, we see that 54 is quite comparable. 54% states that they are highly bilingual. So they read novels in 2 languages and speak 2 languages. Some feel, 42% feel that they are moderately bilingual, and only 4% feel that they are only proficient in 1. So this question was actually asked by Dr. Beth O'Brien as well as Dr. Vaish. Can you explain to the audience why this question?
Well, firstly, I'm so happy to see the results. I was actually not expecting such a high bar as 54% for I read novels in 2 languages. So I'm very happy to see that. Well, the purpose of the question is to sustain and encourage bilingualism in a country like Singapore. And when we started this program, we mentioned that we are a multilingual, multicultural country, and as part of Southeast Asia, which is a highly multilingual part of the world, I think it behooves us to sustain this asset, this symbolic asset that we have. So I think that of course, my personal mission is to see the highest bar for I read 2 novels in 2 languages. So the purpose of this question is to make people think about their own bilingualism and to celebrate it, to encourage it within themselves and not to lose their language, because it's a very beautiful, all languages are very beautiful and they are a great symbolic and cultural resource. And we should not lose it. We should sustain it and develop it. So that's the impetus behind this question, to make people think about their own bilingualism and to support it within themselves and their families.
Okay, thank you so much. I think, do we have any other responses from the panelists as well? So, Mr. Zaki and Ms. Sanesa, are you surprised with these results? Are you yourself considered bilingual?
but I think firstly, I think this is interesting, but it's also dependent on the people that we have here. So to some extent, we have many teachers here who have to be bilingual because it's part of their job. I myself went through this experience too, because I came from the private sector to the corporate, I was in the corporate world, and you hardly use both languages, but coming to public sector, you have to use that. So then, you know, because of your living environment, that changes a lot of the usage, you know, in terms of whether you read, whether you follow up, and whether you use it. So to some extent, I was also keen to ask, you know, our panelists, you know, whether there's a difference between, you know, really doing a lot of reading and doing a lot of speaking, because how the child develops goes beyond school too, because I'm quite certain the standards of, you know, all our preschool teachers here and curriculum set by the schools are pretty robust. So I think the education in school is probably good. It is very likely good. Just that, you know, when you get home, the experience will be very different. So do you think, based on your studies, you know, they pick up better speaking, and having more interactions at home with parents, or whether it's really about reading. So you have both that we discussed earlier in terms of whether you have books and materials and social media. So what's the best way to develop reading kids, especially at home? That's my question for the panelists.
Yeah. Ms. Sanesa, would you like to answer this as a practitioner?
I always believe that everything starts from the home. So parents will definitely have to be the model, and they themselves have to be, like I mentioned just now, comfortable and confident, so that when they are using it, the children will also use it as well. Yeah.
Dr. Vaish and Dr. O'Brien, any last parting words in relation to what Mr. Zaki has asked?
I think that in terms of thinking about different domains of language, so whether it's spoken or written language, even starting at young ages, I mean, a lot of the research that we're showing you has to do with things like shared book reading that parents do with their children at a young age. And just like some corpus linguistic studies have found that the types of words that you come across in books are much different than what you come across in normal everyday conversation. So it's a very good foundation for expanding children's vocabularies, giving them more kind of complex sentence structures that you wouldn't normally use in typical conversation that you would see in books. So I think that even if children, are pre-readers and maybe they're not going to learn a lot yet from books, just being exposed to the content of storybooks or expository books at a young age is a good thing.
I think the key word here is nurturing, right? Nurturing the love first for reading, and also to have that conversation to be kept in the home as well. How about Dr. Vaish? Any last words or comments?
Well, just to add to what Beth said, we should try to make our homes, I mean, it will require some management on the part of the parent, to provide all the resources at home in terms of hard copies of books, multimedia, movies, even movies with subtitles in various languages. That can also help. Sometimes like children like Disney movies, and today these movies are subtitled in hundreds of languages. So even if the child is reading the movie, you read a movie instead of watching it, even that is helpful. Talking to the children about their experiences. And I mentioned trans-languaging, that's mixing languages. And in the past, mixing languages was considered bad practice. But today, research has shown that trans-languaging or code mixing is actually a very powerful resource in language learning, because it creates meta-linguistic awareness. It creates awareness in children about the way languages are patterned, the patterns of languages and the linguistic distance between languages. Just for instance, morphological patterns between Malay and English are actually somewhat similar. Of course, there are some differences, but they're also quite similar. So if you mix languages, children become very sensitized to how the rules of language interplay. So those are all good and very rich environments in which children can learn language. And again, as Beth said, human interaction, of course, is key for very young children. I would not advise parents to remove human interaction and replace it with technology. That would not be appropriate at all, especially for very young children. I mean, for older, young adults, perhaps, it is inevitable. But yes, learning language through human interaction and intervention is the best way.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Vaish. So before we end this panel discussion, may I now invite Mr. Zaki to provide the closing remarks for this session. Mr. Zaki?
Well, firstly, I just want to say, thank you once again to all our panelists. You've been brilliant. I've learned quite a lot from this session, taking notes down as well as you were speaking. And for MENDAKI, this is an area in which we are going to go deeper, and this is really for our audience out there, where traditionally, if you talked about MENDAKI and the kind of programs that we had, they've traditionally been very school-based, school age type programs from primary school all the way up to the higher education. And in the last couple of years, we've started to venture a lot deeper into preschool education, and really bilingualism is one of them. But the real thinking is that the foundations that we set out when they are in preschool sets them right for the rest of, for the most part of their education. And this is where we think the community, including those who may come from challenged families, where the resources, the effort, and the community outreach, to this group will be very important for us to ensure that they start off on right foot when they get to school, and they get very solid foundations through the various programs through the preschools in partnership with MENDAKI. So this is where I hope that moving forward, we are working closer through various programs such as KMM and other outreach programs with our preschool partners. This is where I hope we can have greater collaboration with our friends from NIE, as well as our partners like PCF and TUC, as well as other kindergartens or childcares out there. So for those who are keen to volunteer with us, come on board and partner with us. This is a journey where we're happy to bring the community on board. And really, as you've seen today, we will also be engaging experts who can give us greater insights for us to improve our programs, and for our staff and partners to improve our competency and expertise, learning from the various experts and content that we can gather insights from. So I just want to say a big thank you again, as well as to the organizing committee for putting this together, and looking forward to greater collaboration and taking this to greater heights. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zaki and all the panelists. Also, just to take note, we have a few announcements after this to invite anyone who's interested to join us in our different MENDAKI programs. I think you'll be very interested in some of the programs that are related to early childhood education. Before we move on, I would like to take this opportunity to express my thanks to our friends from National Library. We were talking a lot just now about books. So I have 3 books that were recommended by them on the topic of bilingualism. So 2 of these books are e-books, so you can actually download after this. So the first title is called Bilingual Project Learning in Singapore Preschool. It is a guide for parents and educators. It's by Charmaine Teo and Ho Hui Hua. I've read this book and I personally recommend it for our preschool practitioners who wants to do projects. This is also open to parents. These projects ask 3 questions. How do we provoke? How do we investigate, and how do we reflect on our conversations with our children? So I thought that would be a very good book to recommend to parents as well as preschoolers. The second one is Raising a Bilingual Child by Barbara Zurer Pearson, and the third one is 7 Steps to Raising a Bilingual Child. These are books that are recommended by our NLB friends. So thank you very much from them. So please download this and read them at your own leisure. So viewers, I hope you have enjoyed watching today's session. I know it's a bit short. Maybe next year we will do it longer, yeah? So please pick up the strategies and tips on how to teach our children to be bilingual at home and in school. And I do encourage you to attend the next session, which is tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. And thank you once again. Over to you, Afia.
Thank you very much, Faisal, and to our panelists for the informative and robust discussion. Now, to all our participants, not to worry. For the questions that were not addressed during the webinar, we will follow up and respond to your queries via email. We will also be sharing the slides with all our participants. Now, before we end today's session, may I invite our 3 panelists, Mr. Zaki Mohammed, CEO of Yayasan MENDAKI, Madam Zuraida Abdullah, as well as our Deputy CEO, Madam Aida Royani Adam, to join our panelists to take a photo together on screen. May I please invite you to turn on your webcams for us to take a screenshot. Now, on the count of 3, please smile and we will have someone to take a screenshot. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. And thank you, everyone. Now with that, we have come to the end of our session. We would like to extend our sincere thanks to all our panelists for joining us this afternoon. We hope you have enjoyed today's session and gained useful insights from both the presentation and discussions. Now, before we end today's session, we would like to invite our early childhood professionals to join us and be a part of the MENDAKI Alliance of Preschool Professional, or MAP, M-A-P-P. The MAP is a platform for members to extend their current network and share their knowledge and skills with other early childhood professionals and educators through various events and activities. You may visit the link or scan the QR code for more information on the MAPP. Now, we would also like to invite interested participants to volunteer with MENDAKI in our numeracy class Matematika program. So do visit the link or scan the QR code that you see on the screen. So once again, this is for the MENDAKI Alliance Preschool Professionals, or MAPP. You can come and register at the link on the screen. Now, for us to improve future sessions, we'd also appreciate if you could also please take some time to respond to our feedback survey. You may visit the link or scan the QR code on the screen to access the survey. Kindly be reminded that our next session, how do we improve the quality of teacher-child interactions in the preschool classroom, by Dr. Nirmala Karupia, will be on Thursday, that's tomorrow on 23rd July, from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Till then, thank you and see you again.